just held her, and like it took a few moments, actually, like quite a couple of minutes, and my husband said, "Should we check if we have a girl or a boy?" I was just like not even just holding her, and um couldn't quite believe that it was over and that we'd done it the way that we planned and the way that I wanted, and that everything had just been so perfect.
I had my children on the floor. I was on my favourite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realised in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women.
Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears, I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi, Vicky, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. I am so excited to have a fellow ex-midwife here today. I'm so excited for this conversation. I have so many questions. I have not cheated, and I haven't asked you anything before this recording. I know nothing about you or your, midwifery journey or anything, but I'm so curious both about that and of course about your free birth.
Yeah, nice to be with you today. I listened to your podcast a lot when I was pregnant, so it's really nice to come back full circle. It's nearly 2 years gone past now, so nice to be here and reliving that story again with you.
So lovely to have you. And I also like there's so many things about, obviously I don't know anything yet. I just know what you wrote as you kind of, applied to be on the podcast. And I also love that we're actually coming up to your baby's second birthday, and it's on or around Samhain or Halloween or all, Saints Eve, whatever you want to call it, when the veils are really thin. I do also, there's something about this time that is just so auspicious and magical. And it's also, I think it's curious when babies come through this very time, isn't it? So do you want to speak to that first? Do you have any feelings around
Yeah.
that too?
Yeah, so I feel very much the same. I think it was the perfect day for her to be born. It was Halloween morning. She was born on the 31st of October. Um, and yeah, my pregnancy kind of just felt like it was very in alignment with the season. So like you're saying, this veil is thinner around this time of year, and it was kind of a really lovely way to like mark the ending of the pregnancy and the beginning of my motherhood journey. So it felt very fitting. And it was, I don't know whether it was the energetics of the day as well. It just felt very magical and very potent. And I think that just, enhanced everything that I was experiencing. So,
Yeah, beautiful. I love that.
so
Yeah. So I would love also to hear about. Obviously, I chose to deregister as well as a midwife, and I would love to know your story. Were you a midwife for a long time? I just want to hear your story about how did you come into midwifery? What made you exit? And what do you do now,
yeah.
actually?
Yeah, so I started my midwifery training when I was 19,
Mm.
and I completed it then when I was 21. So I did the direct entry midwifery 3-year training. Um, and at the time, like I hadn't been pregnant before, I wasn't a mum, so it was really my first experience of that whole world. And so everything that I was seeing, everything I was learning, that I just absorbed it as this is how it is. This is the reality of birth and pregnancy. Um, and I don't know what it was, but something just even through the training just didn't really sit right with me. Like I said, even though I didn't have the experience from the other side, I just felt a lot of kind of what was learnt in the classroom wasn't really put into practice in the field in the way I was expecting it to be. And there's a few really potent things I remember about kind of women maybe almost being actively discouraged to trust their intuition. And I kind of felt it really odd. Even just from the simplest thing, like their due date. I know some women would come in and they would be absolutely sure when their due date was. But it was kind of like, okay, but you can't be sure, so we'll use our dates, and kind of, how it goes. But again, because I hadn't experienced it myself, I couldn't really put my finger on what it was that wasn't sitting right with me. Anyway, I finished my training and I never practiced. I never went into practice. And it was only once I started really thinking about becoming a mum, I started reflecting back on what it was that I had experienced as a midwife in training, and what it was that, I wasn't comfortable with. So I kind of went on this journey. I think in some ways I felt like I delayed becoming a mum because I was quite fearful of the system, actually. There were obviously other reasons, but that was always a fear in my mind when I become pregnant. Oh my goodness, is this the system I have to go into and navigate my way through? And I didn't really know how to do that any other way than what I'd seen. So yeah, it was quite a big fear for me, actually. And it was only when I became pregnant. So Naya was my second pregnancy. So my first pregnancy brought up a lot of things for me and really set me on this path to exploring a different way of doing things. So that really, my first pregnancy, I lost at 12 weeks. And I think it was a huge lesson for me in, just what my body wanted, how my mind viewed things, and just, it really set me up for this perfect pregnancy the next time around, which was really lovely.
Amazing. I really want to speak to that you didn't, like, when you were finished with your training, you actually didn't go out into practice. And I want to mention that, I did also direct entry midwifery, but in Australia for 3 years. And I think, I don't know exact numbers, but like, this is definitely not exact, but say that we started out being like 80 to 100 maybe in the cohort, and at the end of 3 years we were like 20 or 25 left, like, so many even throughout training dropped out, right? And I think that tells a lot about what you are exposed to and realizations that you have. And then even after, I know a lot of the women that graduated with me are not working as midwives today. I don't even know how many of those, like, what, 25 or whatever we were, who'd like passed the training, because it's so hard as well, like that 3 year direct entry. It is really hard to go through just as a training. But not just that, obviously you're met with a system and it's so different from what you're learning and the evidence, and then you come out in practice and it's the absolute opposite as well, right? The culture. But yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting stats for when it comes to midwifery and women who go into this profession, usually probably, very much like wanting to be of service and with a big heart, and don't maybe make it through the training. And if they do, don't work in the system after, or go into the system, but then drops out after just a few years like I did. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So let's dive on into then, you said things shifted for you after the first pregnancy that you did lose. What shifted, and how did you approach becoming pregnant that time compared to the second?
Yeah, so I think initially I wasn't really 100% sure if I was going to enter into the system at all on that first pregnancy. I was kind of just sitting with myself and seeing how I felt. So I didn't actually book in with that pregnancy, but obviously I lost at 12 weeks. But it really kind of taught me how to sit with it and just see how I was feeling. I wasn't putting any pressure on myself. Um, and then I realized, like, going through that miscarriage again, in a way, it's like a mini birth. And so I was at home, and I was at home with my husband, and I just trusted my body knew what it was doing. And again, it was kind of a little taste of, yeah, this is what birth would be like. This is, my body is doing this now. Um, and I didn't kind of see, I didn't see any medical professionals after. I just knew in my body, like, this has happened, it's completed, and I'm well and I feel good. So I think that trust, that lesson in trust, like I was really lucky actually in my training that the first few experiences I had, I spent a lot of time in that first year with in a standalone birth center, midwifery-led birth center, with a lot of community teams, and their home birth rate was actually pretty high when we compare it to, what you see now. So I really did have a taste of what kind of normal birth could look like. But honestly, I didn't even know free birth was a thing when I was a midwife. It just, yeah, it only came up for me in the last couple of years, really. And so I sat with that when I got pregnant with Naya. I kind of sat with that. I didn't book again for a while into the system. I didn't know what I was going to do about that. And I think actually around 20 weeks, my hand was forced a little bit. We had a little bit of a problem actually with my husband's visa and a little bit of a hiccup, but we had to prove that I was pregnant. Now, obviously at 20 weeks, I had a little bit of a bump, but I hadn't seen a medical professional. So I had to go and have my notes done just so that that was proof that I was pregnant. So I was in the system, but I was really lucky actually. And I think it really does depend on who your midwife is. It's just luck of the draw sometimes, but she was very respectful of the fact I didn't want a lot of intervention. I didn't really want to engage in the system in the traditional sense. So kind of I chose when my appointments were going to be and how frequent they were. I didn't have any palpations or we didn't listen to the fetal heart. I really just had this sense that this womb space was private and it was Naya's and mine, like this private space that didn't want to be listened into or looked at. And I did decide at 30 weeks, sorry, to have a scan. Again, coming from that whole midwifery background, there were like a few seeds of doubt in my mind, and I wanted to check where the placenta was. Just for peace of mind, at this point, I had decided I wanted a home birth and I wanted to free birth. And again, when I explained this to the midwives, it's not something they'd really seen much before here, but again, they were very much like, that's a legitimate choice. You seem to have done your research. And so they were very respectful, but in a way, I do kind of feel like perhaps if I hadn't have been a midwife prior, they wouldn't have taken it as well. Maybe wouldn't have taken my choices as seriously. So I think that was on my side. And yeah, so I kind of just felt like it was as it was meant to be. Like I said, I had a few doubts come up, like seeds of doubt throughout, and I had to really kind of look at the fears and where they were coming from. Were they rational fears that maybe my intuition was telling me something, or were they things that had come up in my practice? Like I said, seeds of doubt that had grown. And so like that was a lot of my prep work really, is navigating those things. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I'm surprised that that was their response. And I think definitely would be because they knew you were a midwife. Because I don't think I've ever heard anyone have a positive response from saying that they're thinking about free birthing to a midwife in the system, that it would have worried them. So that's curious. Where do you live? Where are you from?
So we're in South Wales.
Mm.
There is, so not far out of Cardiff, there is a midwifery-led birth centre about 20 minutes from here. So the midwives that I was seeing were from a midwifery-led birth centre. So I suppose they were already from that kind of like more natural birthing space. Yeah, perhaps if I'd been in the middle of the city with the university hospital midwives, it would have been a very different experience. So I really did get lucky all around, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful. Okay, so so because you lived in that area and there were kind of birth centers and maybe home births midwife options. What made you choose not to have a midwife present for you? Do you want to share that, please?
Yeah, well, again, like I think when I was training, we'd be told, the best midwives, they sit in the corner and they knit or they do something. They're reading a book and you don't even notice they're there, and um, they're kind of picking up on your cues and they're watching you quietly, and they can get a sense of what's going on, so they know when to step in. And I never saw that in practice. I saw a lot of interference, a lot of poking and prodding where it didn't need to be, midwives taking center stage, and I just wanted to be left alone. I knew, like from some research then that I'd been doing around free birth and looking at how birth would look in the wild in comparison to how it looks once we get into an unfamiliar environment with unfamiliar people, that in itself has the ability to change how we experience birth and how we experience pain. And I had this deep trust in my body. I sat in meditation a lot while I was pregnant, talking to my body, talking to my baby, asking it questions, and it would respond. And so I just felt like even all the fears that had come up for me, bleeding was a big one that kept coming up. And I kept looking back at the research and, seeing how the more we can preserve those pregnancy birthing hormones, the less risk of all of these things going wrong. And it just made sense then, the more interference. And I think also just that fear of knowing for me that was the first step. If I had a midwife here, things are going to be timed and marked, and I just knew how that would make me feel in my mind, and that would have a big impact on how my body was responding. I knew that the hospital wasn't too far away. I knew that if I needed to call a midwife, I could. And I also know that as a first-time mum, the first stages of labor can be long, and midwives do tend to encourage women to stay home as long as possible. So I kind of just thought, well, that's what I would do anyway. That's what we're doing, right? So yeah, it wasn't really an option for me to go to that birth center. I just felt like that was the first step in getting me to a hospital, to be honest, more because of my fear that was there from the system. So for me, being home and being alone with my husband, we did have a doula, but that kind of just dissolved all of my fears.
Yeah, beautiful. So you did have like a woman presence there through a doula. That's lovely to have that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, I'm so curious, just, and I so know what you're talking about. I recognize what you're saying. Um, and especially that's something that I witnessed. I think you can get lucky both in hospital and in birth centers with midwives who actually are like us and really do embody kind of sitting in the corner type of midwife or birth worker. But they're rare. Definitely, and more so in the system, you find, and because they have to, I find I've had experiences of beautiful midwives outside of the system who are independent, who very much can be those very much traditional midwives, but there's so few, and you have to, you have to be lucky to have someone in your area that's like that, and yeah, there is a risk though. It's always a risk that you might think you found someone and then she ends up actually not being the midwife you thought. That's also a risk. So ex-midwife to ex-midwife, I know exactly what you're thinking and feeling and really understand your reasoning for sure. So I'm now so curious about you coming closer. So obviously you had the 30-week scan. Was the placenta out of the way? Was it good placed? I'm guessing
Yeah, so
you
it
had a
was out
birth.
of the way. Yeah, so it was out of the way. Actually, it was really interesting. Like I did use the whole pregnancy as a real practice in getting to know my body, and I'd for months and months like mapped my sensations, where I was feeling nice movements, and there was one space that I kind of never really felt much, and I was like, I wonder if that is where the placenta is. That would make sense to me. And so it was really interesting then once we went to have the scan, and that is exactly where the placenta was. And it was kind of like, again, a lesson in like, I know this stuff. I know what's going on in my body. And yeah, it was, again, peace of mind. I'm glad I had the scan. But also it just reconfirmed to me that I was in control and I knew what was going on. And my body was telling me.
What a beautiful confirmation. I love that. And that's the thing, is that we know so much. I mean, we're really intuitive creatures, and like, if life and the external world wouldn't bring us so much outside of ourselves, this is exactly what each woman can feel and know. And I truly believe that. And I wish more women would claim this and take time. I mean, not just in pregnancy, but just in life, to get to know their bodies like intimately, to like really get to know her cycles and her seasons, and how rich our lives would be if all women did so.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think that's where I was coming from with the pregnancy. Like I was aware from my training, like I said, the kind of active discouragement in not trusting your body as a woman, and seeing that we're not really encouraged to do that growing up as young women. Um, that this was my time to practice that. This was the time. And also, like, looking back at midwifery as well, I remember there was a thing that midwives would say, like, if there was a midwife off on maternity leave and, oh gosh, she had the most horrendous birth. But all us midwives, we always have terrible births. It was kind of a thing that they would say in the hospital. And I kind of figured that we had this sense that it was because we knew too much, and that fear was there.
Yeah.
And so that's where I started exploring this different way, because if fear and knowing too much could have that outcome, which was what we were saying, right, then if I unlearn and relearn a different way, how could that impact how I birth this baby? So yeah, just so many little things, like little lessons. In fact, I don't know, maybe I look back and I think, that midwifery training that I did was all in preparation for this,
Mm.
for Naya's birth.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's so true, that as birth workers, whatever birth worker we are, whether we're working, as a doctor, a midwife, a nurse, or a doula, or sacred birth worker, and fill in the blank, it's so important to realize what we're being exposed to, what kind of birth culture and birth narratives and births we attend, and to work on ourselves and release things that potentially were traumatic, and reframe things in our minds. And yeah, especially if you work in the hospital system, or whether you're a midwife or a doula, whatever, work in the hospital system, you see so much of that which is actually not normal and is man-made, right? And it doesn't show you truly what birth is like. It doesn't truly show you the magnificence of this design, what physiological birth can and should look like, right? As it's upheld. So this is, I think, is so important as we're birth workers, to realize what we're holding and check ourselves when we get pregnant. So we don't, just what you say, like play out what we've seen, if we've seen too much of that unnormal, unnatural ways in the hospital, especially.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you have a doula. When did you decide to have a doula, and how did you find her?
So I think probably around the 20-week mark. I'd been listening to a lot of podcasts, and I'd spoken to my husband about free birthing at home. And so obviously, like, I was coming from a place where I knew how birth looked, and or in one way, and I kind of knew somewhat of what to expect. But obviously, he's never done this before, and I think really we decided to have the doula more so that he felt supported, or he felt like we weren't alone. And I think that was important for me to recognize, because obviously how he felt, if he felt secure in this position, I was going to pick up on that in labor. So it was for all of us, really, because yeah, I needed him to feel safe and secure in this decision. And if that meant having a doula present to support us and to support him, even though, even if it was just to see the look on her face, and she was calm, so he should be calm. And I just knew that if that wasn't the case, then that was also a possibility to have an effect on how I was feeling. So that was really the reason behind it. And yeah, I found her. I listened to quite a few different podcasts, and she'd come up. Her name had come up a few times, and she was local. So we reached out, and she worked in a team. So there were two doulas. So it was the second doula who actually attended the birth. It wasn't the doula that I'd actually brought on board in the beginning, but it worked out just beautifully. It was, I think her energy was supposed to be in that room with us. It was really, to be honest, she only arrived about 2 hours before Naya was born. So we really did experience it alone. But yeah, it was just perfect, actually. Just the help that she gave during and afterwards was just, it was really lovely to have an extra set of hands here, and just, yeah, that feminine energy. And
Love that. Beautiful. All right, so let's dive on into your birth story. Do you want to share? Did you have any early signs of labor approaching for you, or did it start with a bang?
so no, I was 39 weeks. And I went to bed that night, the night before, and I just kind of thought, I wonder, tonight could be the night. It was just in my head. And I'd never thought that before, but I thought, I just wonder, maybe tonight. I went to sleep. I slept well. And around 3:30 a.m., I would say, I kind of stirred, and I kind of felt a bit off. But I didn't for a second think I could be in labor. I thought, oh, I might, maybe my tummy's a bit off. Maybe I just don't feel well. So um, I just kind of dozed in and out for another hour. And then I started kind of feeling things like, oh, okay, maybe this is not like just a tummy ache. Maybe this is something more. And so I kind of just found myself like on all fours on the bed, just rocking in the dark for about an hour, just like in my own little space, in my own dark little world. And I kind of, yeah, it was funny. Again, I didn't even think like, oh, I'm in labor. I just was in this little bubble. And it was nice to have that time alone, actually. I kind of wanted to leave my husband sleep because I thought this could be a long journey. So let's just see how this goes for now. I might need his support later. So I think within the hour then he'd woken up and things were getting a bit more intense. So I think we got out of bed around 5:30. And I had a TENS machine at home. So we popped the TENS machine on, came downstairs, and yeah, I got into this rhythm where I was just rocking, like on my hands and knees, just rocking back and forth. And gosh, the time went so fast. I just can't, like, looking back, it just felt like minutes. It was a fairly fast labor, actually. For my first, I kept, like Uriah said to me, maybe we should call the doula and just tell her things are starting. And I was like, okay, but don't tell her to come yet. We've got ages. Like, this is just the beginning. Don't tell her to come yet. And then I think around 8 o'clock, we gave her a call. And we were like, okay, like, come now, but don't rush. Like, we've still got time. And then just before she arrived, I felt like this really intense surge. My waters went. And then I felt like the pressure. So at that point, once the doula had arrived, I asked my husband to go and fill the pool. So a little bit about our living situation. We live in a little self-built tiny house, and I was adamant I wanted a water birth. I had to have the pool. It's just something I had to have. And we looked at all these different pools, and they just wouldn't fit in the house comfortably with us. We wouldn't be able to open the door, basically. We could have put it in the living room, but we wouldn't have been able to open the door, which wouldn't have really worked. So a friend of mine had said to me, I have a bell tent that has a little log burner in it. And I was like, could I do that? It's going to be, I'm due beginning of November. Would it be too cold? Anyway, I came home and I said to my husband, like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, let's do it. Um, so that was what we did. We put up this bell tent just outside the front of the house, and we lined the floor, and we had the little log burner going. Yeah, so we went outside and we went into the tent and we decorated it, and it was like fabric draped, like Halloween colors, actually purple and orange, like fabric draped in there. And it was really cozy. So I got in the water, and I think probably within an hour and a half, yeah, Naya was born in the water. So the sensations were like, I kind of don't really remember feeling contractions like in the traditional sense. There was very intense sensations, but definitely a pressure and just my body allowing her to come. I'd done a lot of meditations when I was pregnant, kind of talking her through the positions to get in. Like, this is again my kind of more medical mind, knowing like the optimal position for a baby to come in. And so we'd kind of run through that in our heads, between me and Naya, like, this is, this is going to be the way that you're going to be born. And it was just, yeah, magical, really. Like, not what I'd seen at all in my 3 years of training. Like, I'd seen nothing like this. It was a birth, yeah, that I didn't know could exist, honestly.
Beautiful. So it sounds like it was pretty quick. Do you want to talk us through that timeline?
Yeah, so from the first kind of like niggle at 3:30 in the morning, which I wasn't even sure I was in labor, and she was born just after 10 o'clock in the morning.
Mm.
Um, the next part of the labor was very different.
Mm.
So my placenta took 8 hours further to come.
Mm.
So it's, yeah, again, something I had never seen or heard of in practice. And we'd kind of like, after she'd come, we cocooned ourselves in the tent. It was nice and cozy. And after a couple of hours, I was like, I guess like my midwife's mind was like, oh, well, by now they would have expected it to come. And, but I very much stayed in my body, and what I was sensing. And I sensed that all was well. I just kind of felt this quiet confidence that this is fine, this is within the range of normal. Um, I had come across, and I just kept checking back in on myself, like, how do you feel? I feel fine. Okay, so you're fine. Yeah, so the placenta was born 8 hours later. Yeah, and to be honest, after that, it was quite, actually, it was more of a struggle. I kind of felt like that was more of an active birth than Naya's. Naya's kind of just came. The placenta, I felt like I had to do a little bit more work with, which again is just very interesting, the way these things work out and the lessons that are behind them. But yeah, my husband had actually also spoken to his mum in between, and she'd been looking at, how long it can take mammals to birth their placentas in the wild, and like, examples of how it could sometimes take 2 days for like a cow to birth a placenta. And I was kind of like, okay, well, if this is how it can work in nature, then that's what we're doing here. So yeah, that was it was a long labor, I guess, from beginning to the end of the third stage, but Naya's actual birth was fairly short. Yeah.
So I'm really curious for you to talk us through actually like what you did. So it was quite a short story in the sense of you telling it. So let's unpick it a bit more because I'd like to hear,
Mm.
you know, for example, before we even dive on into the placenta, I would love to hear your like the birth moment. So you were in the pool. Do you want to talk us through, like, did you come out in one go? Did you have the ring of fire? Did you birth the head first? How was your contractions?
Okay,
I would love to know a bit deeper about the actual birth.
yeah. So I was kind of just like on my knees, leaning on the side of the pool. And I could feel her head coming, but I was like, there's no way. This is just like so early for her head to be coming. And that was always in my mind, like, no, this is so quick. This is so quick. Um, but I felt her coming. I didn't have the ring of fire actually. Again, this was something that um I worked through when I was pregnant because it was one of those the transition phase from the first to second stage of labor, and then that ring of fire were two places where I saw women lose control during my midwifery training. And like those are the kind of pivotal moments that I saw women either thrived or they kind of spiraled a little bit. And so I'd kind of played with that. I had a friend as well that said to me, you know what, no one ever told me about that sensation when the head is crowning, that ring of fire. And I was so scared. And I was like, yeah, that no wonder women freak out and they kind of clamp down. And then that's when things, you know, maybe they need a little bit more help because their body is in this state of fear and it's tense. And so I played with that a lot when I was pregnant. I know you can get all these devices that help like stretch the perineum. And so I'd bought something with the intention not to use it as an exercise tool to stretch, but to play with the sensation and see how it made me feel.
Mm.
So I never kind of, so I had this, I bought, I think it was called the Epino. So it's like a little balloon that you inflate. And so like the goal was to inflate it to a certain size over, a certain amount of weeks and kind of get used to that. But that's not what I did at all. I kind of would just inflate it to the point where I got that sensation and just breathed through it and kind of saw what it brought up in me, what fears, what it made my body want to do, how it made me want to respond. Was I afraid? Was I wanting to move? Did my muscles tense up? And so I kind of worked with that for a little bit while I was pregnant. And I guess learning to breathe through that sensation when it came to it and birthing Naya's head, I don't really remember feeling that at all. And I don't remember a point there where I felt afraid. It was just like, yeah, my body just allowed it to happen. It just opened. So I look back and I'm kind of really glad that I did that training in that way. I guess because that was a fear for me, seeing all of these women kind of lose control at that point. It was something that I had to work through. And yeah, when it came to it, it was something that, yeah, just happened. And
That's a beautiful pearl of wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. It's so helpful. And yeah, I know of people using this Epino and other devices that can stretch the vagina and make you experience that kind of similarity to the stretch of and the ring of fire. And I find it so interesting to see how women are both moving through that, and some even without doing that training. Don't really have that sensation of ring of fire. Many do, and I think it's
yeah.
important to talk about and to talk about how to move through it. And as you say, actually
Mm,
fearing it and tensing against has the risk then of tearing, right? Because we're tensing the tissue that's supposed to stretch.
yeah.
And so doing things like that, or perineal massage or whatever it is that can help you, really, it's not about the tissues. I agree. And that's the same when I speak about,
Yeah.
perineal massage. It's not about you stretching the tissues to not tear. It's about you learning how to breathe and relax with the sensation of that stretch happening in your perineum to help you as you're actually entering into that with your baby, not to freak out, not to tense against, right? But to allow. So thank you for sharing that. So you didn't experience that. Did you birth your baby like first the head and then the body, or was she just coming out in one go?
Yeah, so I birthed the head in that position on my knees, leaning over the side of the pool. And then I kind of stayed there for maybe another contraction or two, and then I kind of had this sensation to move onto my back. So I kind of turned and I kind of rested my shoulders on the back of the pool, and then her body was born that way. So kind of I could see her being born. So yeah, her shoulders and her body came out in one go, and I picked her up. Yeah, and I just held her, and like it took a few, it took a few moments, actually, like quite a couple of minutes. And my husband said, "Shall we check if we have a girl or a boy?" I was just like, not even, just yeah, just holding her, and um, couldn't quite believe that it was over and that we'd done it the way that we planned and the way that I wanted. And that everything had just been so perfect up until that point. Just yeah, I couldn't quite believe that we'd achieved what we set out to, really. And then I just felt like I just needed to get out of the pool at that point. And so we'd had like a mattress bed down on the floor of the bell tent, and like we just snuggled up there with some duvets, and we did like a cord burning. And yeah, so we were in the tent for quite a few hours after, actually. Um, it was a really bright sunny day, and there was like some rain now and again that was like just gently hitting the canvas. So there was like a lot of nice, like the light coming through was lovely, and the sounds were really lovely and gentle and supportive. So it was just a beautiful day to have a baby. Like it really was. Like it just engaged all the senses, you know?
Beautiful. And so after the birth, you were just lying there, kind of cuddling with your baby. When did you decide to do a cord burning? Um, and how come you decided to do so before the placenta was birthed?
So it was probably about 2 hours. I'd kind of planned to wait until the placenta was birthed, but I felt like the cord was quite short, and so it was kind of difficult for me to have her in that position for that length of time, and move around with her, like holding her while the cord was fairly short. So at that point, I decided, okay, well, we'll do that now. And then we'll see, kind of, I'll have a bit more freedom to move around. It just wasn't very comfortable, like on my hip, and I just, yeah, I wanted a little bit more freedom. So yeah, we did that. And so yeah, about 2 hours after she was born. Um, and that was kind of like a fun little ritual as well, just like a lot of intention in it, you know, behind it, rather than a quick cut. We thought about kind of, yeah, like different ways of doing it. And I guess it takes quite a long time. I didn't actually realize how long it takes to burn the cord. So just, yeah, having to sit there and kind of intentionally sever that connection was kind of a really nice way to do that. Yeah, so then I had a bit more freedom to move around. I was a bit more comfortable then. And I had like a little stool that I could sit on, to get me in like a bit of a squat position. It was more comfortable for me to feed her, and move around. And then eventually we came back into the house and just got cozy in the house.
And so before in those 2 hours, was the cord too short for her to have a breastfeed, or could you still do that in those 2 hours, first 2 hours?
No, I could. It was long enough to have a feed, just not long enough to kind of move around easily with her in my arms, or for me to give her to someone else while I moved. It was just a little bit like just too tight. But yeah, she did have a feed. She fed probably within that first half an hour. Yeah, and the breastfeeding kind of, it actually was surprisingly easy for me. Again, it's all these, you go back to the midwifery and it's like something that women struggle with. So there was a fear behind there, and I kind of just got rid of all the advice,
Mm-hmm.
and I just went with what felt right. There were a few times I looked at it from, you know, my midwife's eye, and I thought, oh, she doesn't look right on there, but it felt right.
Mm.
And I left it, and it was fine. And we had actually a really easy introduction into breastfeeding, like very easy. And
Beautiful.
I was, yeah, so grateful that, yeah, but I guess also, the way that the birth unfolded, we were just in that right space for us to just keep allowing my intuition and her intuition to guide us.
Yeah, beautiful. And after the birth, did you have any kind of after birth pain? So did the kind of contractions or surges?
Um, and I just kept checking back in on myself, like, how do you feel? I feel fine. Okay, so you're fine. Yeah, so the placenta was born 8 hours later. Yeah, and to be honest, after that, it was quite, actually, it was more of a struggle. I kind of felt that that was more of an active birth than Naya's. Naya's kind of just came. The placenta, I felt like I had to do a little bit more work with, which again is just very interesting, the way these things work out and the lessons that are behind them. But yeah, my husband had actually also spoken to his mum in between, and she'd been looking at, how long it can take mammals to birth their placentas in the wild, and like, examples of how it could sometimes take 2 days for like a cow to birth a placenta. And I was kind of like, okay, well, if this is how it can work in nature, then that's what we're doing here. So yeah, that was it was a long labor, I guess, from beginning to the end of the third stage, but Naya's actual birth was fairly short. Yeah.
So I'm really curious for you to talk us through actually, like what you did. So it was quite a short story in the sense of you telling it. So let's unpick it a bit more because I'd like to hear,
Mm.
you know, for example, before we even dive on into the placenta, I would love to hear your like the birth moment. So you were in the pool. Do you want to talk us through like did you come out in one go? Did you have the ring of fire? Did you birth the head first? How was your contractions?
Okay.
I would love to know a bit deeper about the actual birth.
Yeah. So I was kind of just like on my knees, leaning on the side of the pool. And I could feel her head coming, but I was like, there's no way. This is just like so early for her head to be coming. And that was always in my mind, like, no, this is so quick. This is so quick. Um, but I felt her head coming. I didn't have the ring of fire actually. Again, this was something that um I worked through when I was pregnant, because it was one of those, the transition phase from the first to second stage of labor, and then that ring of fire were two places where I saw women lose control during my midwifery training. And like those were the kind of pivotal moments that I saw women either thrived or they kind of spiraled a little bit. And so I'd kind of played with that. I had a friend as well that said to me, no one ever told me about that sensation when the head is crowning, that ring of fire. And I was so scared. And I was like, yeah, that no wonder women freak out and they kind of clamp down. And then that's when things, you know, maybe they need a little bit more help because their body is in this state of fear and it's tense. And so I played with that a lot when I was pregnant. I know you can get all these devices that help like stretch the perineum. And so I'd bought something with the intention not to use it as an exercise tool to stretch, but to play with the sensation and see how it made me feel.
Mm.
So I never kind of, so I had this, I bought, I think it was called the Epino. So it's like a little balloon that you inflate. And so like the goal was to inflate it to a certain size over, a certain amount of weeks and kind of get used to that. But that's not what I did at all. I kind of would just inflate.
Not continue after?
Um, for the first couple of hours, no. And then they kind of intensified a bit later with the placental delivery. It wasn't until like quite late in the evening then that I birthed the placenta. And actually, those contractions were more intense than what I felt during the labor. And I think, yeah, my doula actually said, I've never actually seen someone almost actively push a placenta out. It was like I was birthing. It
Yeah.
was like I was birthing. Because I don't actually remember pushing with Naya. it was kind of like I had the sensation, I had that pressure, and my body opened and stretched and moved. I don't remember actively bearing down or pushing, but the placenta was, yeah, it was very different.
So I'm so curious. So let's talk through this. So the first couple of hours sounds like you're just snuggling with your baby, you're breastfeeding, you're not really thinking about the placenta, you're doing the cord burning ceremony. And after that, are you actively throughout the next kind of 6 hours trying to birth the placenta, or are you just leaving it and just going about however the day is unfolding?
So it wasn't probably until like about 2 hours before I birthed the placenta that I was kind of actively trying. I'd I kind of I hadn't drunk a lot, I hadn't eaten a lot. The day went so fast, that we'd kind of all I'd had little bits of food, but like it went so fast that towards the end of the evening I thought, gosh, have I drunk? Like, what have I drunk? What have I eaten? We were just like caught up in this, like the magic of her being here. Um, and I hadn't really emptied my bladder, so and I knew that could hold the placenta up. So I kind of again put my midwife hat on a little bit, and I was like, okay, I'm going to drink, I'm going to go in a warm shower, I'm going to see if I can kind of just empty my bladder and see if I can move around a little bit. So my husband had the baby, and I kind of just had a long warm shower. And then I got out, and like nothing was really changing. I couldn't empty my bladder. I didn't really have that sensation. And I'd tried a few times, and I think at that point I was like, it was getting late, it was getting dark, and I was like, how long do I leave this now? But then I think we'd tried some like essential oils, like just dripped in the shower and things like this. And I think at some point then the contractions started getting a bit stronger. And I could feel it there. I could feel something wanted to come, but it just wasn't coming. So I was kind of in a squat position. I was moving around a lot, back on my all fours. And yeah, it was kind of like it was almost like I had to push it out kind of the whole way through the birth canal. It was again something I've never seen in my practice either. Like obviously for the majority of women, I guess it's medically managed. But for even the very few kind of placental deliveries that I saw weren't that they weren't natural, they weren't really pushed out as such, not in the way that I did. So yeah, it was, again, it was just something that my body felt I had to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I've witnessed that for sure. Women have had a physiological birth and then like actively having to like squat, push, different position to get the placenta out. It's not always, sometimes it just slips on out like straight after birth or just when 15 minutes after, half an hour after, it just comes on out. But I would say a lot of women also kind of gently guides it or coughs or makes kind of effort. It's not, I would say it's the minority that it just kind of flops on out on its own. Even if you had a natural birth, it's kind of like um, maternal effort in some way, shape, or form, and using gravity and like actively like deciding to birth that. So
Yeah.
how long were you pushing for? And was that like, did your body take over or did you stimulate it somehow to start having those contractions, or did it just happen on its own? What unfolded?
Yeah, it kind of just happened on its own. I think I'd had like quite soon after having Naya, I'd had quite intense contractions. And then they kind of slowed in the middle of the day. I guess maybe my body was just resting. Maybe it didn't have the energy to push it out at that point, and it was resting. And then they kind of just picked up on their own. Like I said, we did use some essential oils, possibly a tincture of some sort, which I can't actually quite remember now. But yeah, it kind of just, my body was ready, I guess, at that point. I did try, like you said, the coughing and some squatting and moving around. Um, and yeah, it was, my body took over, and I just felt like I needed to push this out, so that's what I did.
Yeah. And how long did you push for?
I think it was probably about an hour and a half at least, if not 2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite slow. Even once it started emerging, like it still took quite a few pushes for me to get the whole thing. Yeah.
And after it came out, and during those 8 hours, did you have any blood loss?
I did, yeah, probably slightly more than what we would have classed as normal in, in midwifery practice. Probably would have said about 800 mil.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it was more about I felt fine. I
Yeah.
felt absolutely fine. In fact, when I'd had my first miscarriage, like my blood loss wasn't all that big, and I felt really weak and drained for days afterwards. Whereas this bigger blood loss than what a midwife would class as like normal, I felt my energy levels were fine, and yeah, so I wasn't concerned. It was normal for me because I felt well. That's how I
Mm.
viewed it.
Mm.
Um,
And was that blood loss throughout the day, or was it like after the birth of the placenta?
it was it was a little bit of both, probably mostly after the placenta. I had a bit of a like quite a big retroplacental clot behind the placenta. So yeah, it was mostly then, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah, but it was kind of coming all out, and then it kind of like normalized, stabilized. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, stabilized very quick. I think it was probably mostly within that hour and a half, 2 hours that I was pushing where the blood loss was. But once it was out, it kind of, yeah, slowed really quick.
Yeah, what an interesting story. And um yeah, it's just so rare to hear of these stories with the placenta being not burned, not born, like in that kind of window of like just an hour or 2 hours, because that's generally how it goes, right? Because just it's just medically managed, of course, in most birth settings, and probably also at home births, at coming up to a couple of hours probably. Um, and so it's always so curious and interesting to unpack these very rare stories where it is a variation, like you just had, where, and that's the thing, and I say this often, you've probably heard me say this too on here, that, it is really holistically, how are you feeling, of course, um, when it comes to blood loss. And yeah, it is curious. I mean, obviously, you had to work really hard to get that placenta out. I guess the question would be, when you had contractions in the first kind of couple of hours after birth, would, if you had it, like if you had made a maternal more effort, then would it have had not been as much of an effort as 8 hours later, like for 1.5 hours? We'll never know, of course, but that's where my midwifery brain goes, instantly going like, curious, it's a curious question to ask. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. I suppose, like at that point, I was so wrapped up in Naya, I kind of just, yeah, wasn't really necessarily again sat with my body like I was when I was in labor. Um, so yeah, I kind of just thought, well, my body will just keep doing this process and it will do this placental bit now, and I'll just, feed my baby and um, have this snuggle time. But yeah, perhaps, who knows? But yeah, I just see it as my body just needed to rest in between, and then when it was ready and it had the energy, I picked it back up, and yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting and different story. Thank you so much for wanting to share it with us. Now, if you had a first time mama who's about to have her first baby and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
So I think, like, looking back at my experience and my story, it's preparation, and that's going to look different for everybody. Like for me, it was really looking at my fears and where they came from, um, looking at the research and comparing that to like what does happen in the wild, relearning those things, sitting with your body, getting to know it, like practicing intuition, like even in the small things throughout the day, like in terms of what you want to eat, like what are you really feeling? Like I think so much of what we do is on autopilot or convenience, but really asking your body the questions and practicing that through the pregnancy. And yeah, I really found the benefit in talking to my body, talking to Naya while she was still in the womb and getting that feedback. It kind of felt a little bit odd in the beginning, and I kind of wondered if it would talk back to me, but I kind of, yeah, it did. And that guided me. So I think it is practice intuition, connect with your body, connect with your baby, and really look at the things that I guess, yeah, the things that are coming up for you, and see how you can navigate those. And I guess also a big thing for me was to fill my head with positive birth stories. Like every time I was in the car, I would have one of your podcasts on. Again, just flooding my brain with these stories, because obviously I'd seen a lot of different stories myself. So I kind of had to, bring some balance to that. Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much. And it makes me so happy to hear of like birth workers that will write to me and say that that's what they're doing to help themselves, especially if they're working in the system, like driving to the birth center, driving to the birth suites, listening to the Natural Birth podcast to counteract what they'll witness in the system. I think that's so beautiful. It's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible birth story. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share the story. I was thinking just a couple of days ago, actually, that it's not a story I've told all that often. Like obviously family and close friends who knew that this was my plan for birth. But yeah, I did find that there were some times, like as a new mum in spaces with other new mums, I held back a lot, hearing their stories. So I would just, you know, keep it brief. I had a home birth, not go into too many details, because it just doesn't feel right sometimes when women have had a rough time of it. And I do think we need to share these stories so women keep hearing what is possible. So yeah, I'm just really glad that I can share this with you and you can share this with others. So
Yeah, thank you so much. It means so much for women to hear these stories. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.